James Carter walked into the luxurious Grand Royal Hotel, expecting the usual warm welcome. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, he carried himself with quiet confidence. However, as he approached the front desk, the receptionist barely looked up before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't serve you," she said firmly. James raised an eyebrow, momentarily taken aback. He had been to this hotel countless times before. Why was he being turned away now? He studied the receptionist's face, but there was no sign of hesitation or remorse. A tense silence filled the air. A few minutes later, the entire staff would learn a shocking truth. James wasn't just another guest. He was their boss, and he had just decided their fate. James let the moment stretch, his sharp blue eyes scanning the receptionist's unwavering expression. He could feel the weight of the stares around him. Other guests, bellhops, even the concierge, all waiting to see how he would react. "Is that so?" he finally said, his voice calm but laced with an edge. The receptionist nodded. "Yes, sir. Our policy." "Your policy," James interrupted, pulling out his phone. A few swift taps, a brief pause, and then a single call. The general manager arrived within minutes, his face pale as he recognized James. "Mr. Carter, I had no idea you were. You should have," James cut in smoothly, "because as of now, you're responsible for a serious mistake. You and your staff just refused service to the owner of this hotel chain." A heavy silence fell over the lobby. The receptionist's face drained of color. James turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, what exactly was the reason for your refusal?" She swallowed hard. I was just following orders." James tilted his head. "Whose orders?" The receptionist hesitated. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then, just as she was about to speak, a voice from behind him interrupted. "That would be me," a man said, stepping forward. James turned, locking eyes with someone he hadn't seen in years, someone he never expected to find in his own hotel. The past had just walked through the front door. James's gaze locked onto the man who had just spoken. He was tall, well-dressed, and wore the kind of smirk that only came from knowing something others didn't. "Daniel Foster," James muttered, the name tasting both familiar and bitter on his tongue. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Daniel said, slipping his hands into his pockets as he took a slow step forward. The air in the lobby grew heavier. The receptionist and the hotel staff exchanged confused glances, realizing this was no ordinary confrontation. James straightened his tie, his mind racing. He hadn't seen Daniel in over 10 years, not since their business partnership had collapsed in betrayal. Back then, they had started out as friends, two ambitious young men with a dream of building a hotel empire. But greed, power, and a single devastating act of deception had torn them apart. And now here Daniel was, standing in James's hotel, giving orders to his employees. "Is this your doing?" James asked coldly. Daniel's smirk widened. "Let's just say, I've been making a few moves while you weren't looking." James clenched his jaw. He had been so focused on expanding his business that he hadn't considered the possibility of an old rival sneaking back into the picture. The receptionist looked between them, clearly realizing she had made a mistake, one that could cost her dearly. "Sir, I didn't know." she started, but James held up a hand to silence her. His focus was on Daniel now. You still haven't answered my question, James said. Why did you order my staff to refuse me service in my own hotel? Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. Your hotel. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only James could hear. Are you sure about that? James felt his stomach tighten. He had come in expecting a routine visit, but something was off. Something much bigger than a simple act of disrespect. Then Daniel pulled something from his pocket and slid it across the counter. A document. James picked it up, his eyes scanning the words. And then he saw it. His grip tightened. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. This wasn't just an insult. This was war. James's eyes burned into the document as he read the bolded words at the top. Transfer of ownership agreement. His own signature stared back at him. Only he had never signed this. A cold chill ran down his spine. His legal team had warned him of minor irregularities in his holdings, but he had brushed them off as routine paperwork issues. Now, standing here, he realized the truth. Daniel hadn't just returned. He had come prepared. This is impossible, James said, voice low but steady. I never signed this. Daniel smirked. Are you sure? Looks like your signature to me, and to the board, and to the lawyers who finalized the deal last week. James's grip on the paper tightened, his knuckles turning white. If this was true, if the board had already approved it, then Daniel had just pulled off the most ruthless corporate coup of the decade. The hotel, his hotel, no longer belonged to him. James exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. Anger wouldn't help him now. If Daniel had forged his signature, there had to be a trail, a weak link he could expose. So that's your play? James asked, keeping his voice even. You steal what you couldn't build yourself? Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, James, you always thought you were the smarter one, but you got too comfortable, too distracted. He leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a whisper. You should have been paying attention. James studied him, his mind calculating. Daniel wanted him to lash out, to make a scene, but James wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, he carefully folded the document and tucked it into his pocket. Enjoy this little victory while you can, James said coolly, because when I come back for what's mine, you won't see it coming. Daniel's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, and James knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. James stepped out of the Grand Royale Hotel, the city lights flickering against the glass doors behind him. The crisp night air did little to cool the fire burning inside him. He had built this empire from the ground up. Every deal, every late night, every risk. And now, Daniel thought he could just take it? Not a chance. James reached for his phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a smooth, confident voice answered. Mr. Carter, I assume this isn't a social call. It's worse, James said, his voice sharp. I need a deep dive on Daniel Foster. Everything business moves, financial records, legal filings. And find out how the hell my signature ended up on that transfer document. A brief pause. Forgery? Bold move. Sloppy if we're lucky. Then let's get lucky. I'll have something within 24 hours. James hung up and exhaled slowly. He had spent years surrounding himself with the best people, and now was the time to prove why. But information alone wouldn't be enough. Daniel had planned this meticulously, which meant he believed James wouldn't be able to stop him. That was Daniel's first mistake. James pulled up another contact and sent a simple text, "Meet me at the Belmont in an hour. I have a job for you." Within seconds, the reply came, "On my way." James slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked up at the towering hotel behind him. He had lost this battle. But the war? It was just beginning. An hour later, James sat in a dimly lit corner of the Belmont, a private lounge where high-stakes deals were made behind closed doors. He stirred his whiskey slowly, watching the entrance. Then, a figure slid into the seat across from him. "Didn't expect to hear from you this late, Carter," said Olivia Hayes, a brilliant corporate attorney with a reputation for dismantling billion-dollar schemes. Her dark eyes studied him, sharp as ever. "I assume this has something to do with Daniel Foster." James smirked. "You always did read between the lines." Olivia leaned in. "Tell me everything." James recounted the events of the evening, walking into his own hotel only to be turned away, Daniel's smug reveal of the forged ownership transfer, and the unsettling realization that his empire had been taken from him overnight. Olivia listened, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. When he finished, she exhaled. "He's good, but not perfect. If that document was forged, we can tear it apart." "I need more than that," James said. "I need proof, and I need to know what Daniel's next move is before he makes it." Olivia nodded. "We'll start with forensic analysis on the signature. If there's even a microscopic inconsistency, we'll blow this wide open." She paused. "But James, this isn't just business for you, is it?" James met her gaze. He could still hear Daniel's voice in his head. "You should have been paying attention." "No," he admitted. "This is personal." Olivia smirked. "Good. That means you won't hold back." James took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Not even a little." Before Olivia could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from his investigator. "Found something. Meet me ASAP. You're gonna want to see this." James's pulse quickened. Daniel thought he had won. But the first crack in his plan had just appeared, and James was ready to break it wide open. James arrived at a quiet office space on the outskirts of the city, where his investigator, Mark Reynolds, was waiting. A seasoned expert in corporate fraud, Mark wasted no time. "You were right," Mark said, sliding a file across the desk. "The signature on that document is a forgery. A damn good one, but not perfect. See here." He pointed to a microscopic inconsistency, something only a trained eye would catch. James exhaled slowly, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "That's enough to challenge the transfer in court." Mark nodded. "But that's not all. I traced the transaction back to a shell company, one Daniel set up months ago. He funneled money through multiple accounts, bribed a few board members, and even paid off a notary to certify the fake signature." James smirked. "So, he built his empire on a house of cards. And you have the wind to blow it down," Mark confirmed. Without hesitation, James called Olivia. "We have everything we need. File an injunction first thing in the morning." She chuckled. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" James leaned back. "Let's just say I love a good comeback." The next morning, Daniel Foster arrived at the Grand Royal Hotel, confident as ever, until security refused him entry. "What the hell is this?" Daniel demanded. James stepped forward, holding up a court order. "It means your little coup is over. The hotel's back under my name. And as for you," he handed Daniel another document. "Termination notice. Effective immediately." Daniel's smirk finally vanished. "You can't." "Oh, I can," James interrupted. "And I did." As Daniel was escorted out, James turned to his staff. "Now let's get back to business." The Grand Royal was his again, and this time he'd make sure no one ever stole it from him.